Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. My name is Robert, and today's program is our good friend Liz is going to talk to us about holiday wreath making. Hi, Liz. How are you? Welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule and take it away. It's all yours.
All right. I am so happy to see everyone here tonight, and I'm going to start off by sharing my screen because pictures make everything wonderful. All right. So I hope you all see what I see.
And just to introduce Liz, we met,
Yeah.
I think, 8 or 9 years ago, and she's a fabulous person, and she's super knowledgeable on a wide variety of historical and cultural topics, partially based on her diverse and interesting professional experiences. But I'll let her talk about that later.
Okay. Just get back to right.
So Liz, if you don't mind,
Technical
if you don't mind me
difficulty.
asking,
Give
how
me
did you get
one.
involved in
Yeah.
Colonial Williamsburg Christmas traditions?
I worked at Colonial Williamsburg for 7 years,
Wow.
and I lived in the historic area. So I was one of those people who had to, because it was part of the lease agreement, decorate my house for the holiday season. So we became very familiar with all of the rules, and had, because I was there for 3 Christmas seasons, kind of the learned the techniques of how to make wreaths. And because I worked for the Department of School and Group Services, we were also the folks who did the Christmas decoration walking tours. So
Awesome.
learned a lot about it, learned how to make them, learned the history of them, and it was fun. And so now every year I continue to make wreaths to put on my house. Right. I think we're ready to go. Can you all see the screen that says Colonial Virginia Christmas Traditions?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. I wish I could actually see all of you tonight. I just sort of like talking into the void a little bit, but I trust that you're all there. And as we go along, I think some of the questions that the folks might have either in chat or in the Q&A, I trust Robert is going to feed those to me.
Yes.
And so we can, make this a conversation as we go along. Very excited because it is, after all, the official holiday season. We're very deep into it. As I drive through my neighborhood, I see lots of lights. I see lots of excitement happening, and including I actually live, within about a mile of 2 different houses that were competitors on the Great Christmas Light Fight. Right? So Christmas and decorating is like a big deal up here in Northern Virginia. But we're going to explore Christmas as it was celebrated in Colonial Virginia. Then we're going to talk about how Colonial Williamsburg really invented this distinctive seasonal decorating style. And then I'm going to show you a little bit of the ins and outs of how to construct one of those wreaths and some of the design principles that are involved in it. But of course, if anyone out there wants to make their own holiday decorations, you are not tied to anyone else's design principles. But I'm going to start with a picture of a church. And this is Pohick Church, which is down in Lorton, Virginia, just down the street from me. If you're ever visiting Northern Virginia or you live in Northern Virginia, you can visit this 18th century church. It was George Washington's church, or one of his churches. And we're starting in this church because Christmas is one of the 2 most important feast days in the Anglican calendar. The other one is Easter. The liturgical calendar is divided into seasons, and we're now in Advent, which commences 4 Sundays before Christmas and is actually the beginning of the liturgical year. And so within the church, it was a time of reflection, contemplation, and fasting is encouraged. So it's sort of and it's also, think about the time of year that it comes when there's no leaves on the trees, everything is kind of brown, it doesn't look very alive. And, there's not as much outdoor work that could be done when the ground is frozen. So it's kind of a reflective, almost very stark time. And then with fasting going along with it. So it's a very reflective season. The first day of Christmas will come on December 25th. So that's the next, comes after Advent, and that marks Jesus's birth. Christmas actually continues for 12 days until January 6th when we get to Epiphany. That's the day that the Magi arrived in Bethlehem, recognizing the baby as Christ the Savior. And then it's going to continue that season on to February 2nd, which is known as Candlemas, or the purification of the Virgin. So that makes Christmas a 40-day cycle. Right. Now, this is a tavern scene. It's a print from the 18th century. And it shows you a little bit about how Christmas evolves, or the celebration of Christmas is going to evolve in England over time. The folks are, not behaving in a terribly reverential way, right? But viewing the birthday celebrations as season, the earliest Christians didn't pay a lot of attention to Jesus's birth. And it's not known exactly when the church begins to celebrate Christmas, but the first reference, the written down reference, is in the year 336, when the Roman Church begins to celebrate the Feast of the Nativity on December 25th. And then they are observing Jesus's birthday on that day. These pagan traditions that are associated with the winter solstice, like wassail bowls, and in this print, you can see a big punch bowl, the use of holly and other evergreens for decorating. And in this print, you can see over in those little diamond-shaped windows in the back of the print, there is greenery that is decoratively stuck into the windows. So you think of like the window is in a pane, and there's a little bit of a gap between the window and where it's being held. And so it's stuck there to hold it in place. And then you can see some mistletoe over in the corner. So this one scene is bringing in some of those pagan traditions, and they all get incorporated into this idea of how you celebrate Christmas. And it's not just decorating your tavern, but decorating your house with holly and ivy and other greenery. Those roots are really dug very deep into pagan Europe. And they're also another feature of that Roman Saturnalia that stretched from December 17th to the 24th. So Saturnalia was the celebration for Saturnus, the god of agriculture. It evolved over, hundreds of years into this kind of all you can think of festival of this unbridled joy. The 13th century historian Matthew Paris said it was characterized by processions, singing, lighting candles, adorning the house with laurel and green trees, giving of presents, men dressed as women, or masquerading in the hides of animals. All of these traditions get fused into the idea of Christmas, and only one of those ideas is actually Christian. Right? So the earliest celebrations are tying the winter solstice and the importance of the sun's return for another fertile growing season. So that custom is added onto by the Romans, who create this week-long Saturnalia, this New Year's festival in honor of the god Saturn, the sower of seeds, right? And then the final layer of meaning is added by medieval Christianity, which regularly saw the attempts to biblical cheer descend into uproar. So people are used to this grim season, like coming into the new year and looking ahead towards planting and harvest and everything else as just a time to kind of cut loose. So it's only in the 4th century that the church, the Christian church, officially decided to observe Christmas on December 25th. And the date was chosen not because of religious reasons, it's not because it was the actual day that Christ was born, but because it happens to mark the approximate arrival of the winter solstice, and because it had been celebrated that way for a very long time. By the time we get to, say, 17th century England and the Puritans are coming to power, they point out, and they point it out often, that Christmas is nothing but a pagan festival that's covered with a Christian veneer. And one of your favorite Boston Puritans, the Reverend Increase Mather, says that he observes in 1687 that these early Christians who first observed the Nativity on December 15th did not do so, quote, thinking that Christ was born in that month, but because the heathen Saturnalia was at that time kept in Rome, and they were willing to have those pagan holidays metamorphosized into Christian ones. Right? And we talk about the Puritans a little bit, like in this print, because the Puritans do come to power and by deposing the monarchy. And when the Puritans come to power in England, then they're also in power, if you will, in the New World. They actually outlaw Christmas, right? And it was outlawed all of the time from the time they settled in New England, and they're also going to, so you can't have Christmas in England either for the years that the Puritans are in charge. So these Calvinists and the Protestants, they really despise the whole celebration, because remember, they've come into, as reformers of religion, to strip away all of the excesses of first the Roman Catholic Church, and then as Henry VIII creates the more purified version, and they want to continue stripping it away down to its essence. So in 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts actually forbids, under the fine of 5 shillings per offense, the observance of any day such as Christmas or the like, either by forbearing of labor, feasting, or in any such way. The Assembly in Connecticut, at the same time, prohibits the reading of the Book of Common Prayer or the keeping of Christmas and Saints' days, making of mince pies, the playing of cards, and performing any musical instruments. And those statutes are actually going to remain in force until they were repealed in the 19th century. So a lot of opposition in New England towards the celebration of Christmas. That does not happen in the rest of the colonies. And when the monarchy is restored in England, it doesn't happen there either. These are 2 English prints that I've pulled up here side by side that are each part of a separate monthly series, because people liked to buy kind of a print of the month, put them all on the wall. Both of these are called December, and they show women collecting and decorating with greens, so an activity that is typical for the month of December in England. So that Christmas custom, it spread to England by the end of the 6th century, later reached Scandinavia, where it becomes fused with the pagan festival known as Yule, right? And we still have Yule logs that are burned today. In the 9th century, during the reign of King Alfred, the Christmas celebration was extended by 12 days, which is how you get it to Epiphany, and so on and so forth. And early in the 11th century, the term Christmas, or the Festival of Christ, enters the English language, and so Christmas becomes a celebration. Anglicans, Roman Catholics, Lutherans, and Moravians celebrated this traditional Christmas season, both religiously and secularly. The celebrations in 18th century American are observed everywhere: New York, Philadelphia, mid-Atlantic colonies, like Pennsylvania and Maryland, and throughout the South. And one of the ways that people prepared their houses for those celebrations was by collecting of the greens. So lavender, rose petals, pungent herbs like rosemary, bay leaves, scattered throughout churches so that you get this really pleasant holiday scent. And the scented flowers and herbs were chosen in part because they were aromatic and considered this kind of alternative form of incense. The Reverend George Herbert, who was an Anglican clergyman in Maryland, urges that the church be swept, kept clean without dust or cobwebs, and great festivals strewed and stuck with boughs and perfumed with this alternative incense. And Virginians decorated their homes in the exact same way. This is a really great print that dates to 1730. It was issued in 1730 by a London nurseryman by the name of Robert Ferber. He publishes a set of 12 prints, one for each month of the year, and it depicts the flowers that were in bloom for that particular month. Very cleverly devised marketing scheme to promote Ferber's nursery in Kensington. They were essentially the first illustrated seed catalog published in England. And you've probably, if you're a gardener, you've heard of Ferber. And if you look at this arrangement, you can see what was available in December in England to decorate your house and bring in a little bit of color. There's some cyclamen, There is the Christmas flower, the white primrose, a yellow corn marigold, geraniums, Cape marigold, sage, rosemary, you know, a lot of pretty different things. What I kind of like about this particular print is that it is kind of a loose flowing arrangement, right? It's not fussy, it's not tight, it's got a little bit of a kind of like almost like a rococo sense about it. Right. Right. But now we're gonna take a look at some of the plants that are available in both places. This is mistletoe. We all know what you do with mistletoe. We saw that in a couple of prior prints. Mistletoe is a parasite, grows at the tops of trees, and there's only one way to get mistletoe down from the tree. And that's by shooting it down with your gun. Right? And in Virginia, we developed this tradition called the shooting of the Christmas guns, and Christmas becomes, celebrations are extremely secular. Philip Vickers Fithian, right, from the Colony of New Jersey, was hired to be a tutor to the Carter family of Nominee Hall in Virginia. When he came to Virginia in the early 1770s, it was like he was entering a foreign country. The traditions were so very different from where he had grown up. And he talks about his very first Virginia Christmas, December 18th in 1773. And he said, "Nothing is now to be heard in conversation but the balls, the fox hunts, the fine entertainments, the good fellowship, which are to be exhibited at the approaching Christmas. I almost think myself happy that my horse's lameness will be a sufficient excuse to my keeping at home on these holidays." He's almost overwhelmed with all of the different balls and parties and entertainments that he's going to be obligated to attend. And he writes on Christmas Day that he was waked this morning by the guns firing all round the house. So it is a very loud welcoming for the Christmas season. Okay. And it is a very raucous season, like this tavern scene can show. Most of the observances were pretty secular, even though people were decorating the church and going to church. Right? It bothers church officials that these vestiges of pagan merriment remain a part of the Christmas celebration, as kind of like, throwing off of these kind of traditional social norms. And you can see that's what these folks are doing in this scene, all underneath that mistletoe tied to the roof of the tavern, or to the ceiling of the tavern. But this merrymaking and feasting remains really the most popular way to celebrate Christmas in England, and also in especially the middle and the southern colonies, right? Cotton Mather, then he comes back and he complains again in 1712 that the feast of Christ's Nativity is spent in reveling, dicing, carding, masking, and all licentious liberty, by mad mirth, by long eating, by hard drinking, by lewd gaming, and by rude reveling. Right? You can kind of see that in these different cards. These are different broadsides that were published in the 18th century. In some Southern homes, it was 12th night, or January 6th, that was the much more festive occasion than Christmas Day itself, because people did go to church on Christmas Day. So when Englishmen wrote that it seems, traveling through Virginia, as we showed before the Revolution, that this is one of their annual balls supported in the following manner. So a traditional way to celebrate 12th night is to have a large, rich cake. It's provided to the assembly of guests, cut into very small pieces, and it's handed round to the company, who at the same time draw a ticket out of a hat with something Mary wrote on it. And he that draws the king out of the hat has the honor of treating the company with a ball the next year, and the lady that draws the queen has the trouble of making the cake. Right? And the king's cake or the queen's cake is something that you continue to see in other parts of America later on. The Reverend James Blair, founder of the College of William and Mary, was awakened about midnight 2 weeks before Christmas in 1702 by the sound of great nails, as he called them, being pounded in to fasten and barricade the doors of the grammar school. So plainly, Christmas cheer was about to overflow once again in Williamsburg, which was the capital of the colony, because the boys at the college were following the schoolboy custom of barring out the teachers. So they're ceremonially locking out the teachers to give themselves a little bit of holiday during the Christmas season. And the hammering surprise is Blair, he said, because that custom had been outlawed at the school many years earlier. All right, so they have every intention of not going to school and having a good time. So in Virginia, particularly, Twelfth Night becomes really the focus of secular Christmas. Very sumptuous balls, lots of guests. It lasts several days. It's mounted in the finest homes. People might travel out to someone else's plantation home and spend a lot of time there. And it did become the tradition that schools or schoolrooms were shut on December 16th, and they only reopen after Twelfth Night. And even on plantations, that everyone is given a holiday. And they're going to celebrate. So this is a punch bowl, and it's a platter with some cakes on it. That observation of Christmas really tends towards good fellowship in eating. The Virginia Almanac for 1772 carries the sentiment on a December page that this month much meat will be roasted in rich men's kitchens, the cooks sweating and making of minced pies and other Christmas cheer, and whole rivers of punch, toddy, wine, beer, cider consumed with drinking. Cards, dice will be greatly used to drive away the tediousness of the long cold nights, and much money will be lost at whist, cribbage, and all fours. And in England, the custom becomes for an apprentice to visit each of his master's clients and collect tips for his services throughout the year. And that's apparently followed in Virginia as well. So that's a way of showing appreciation or tipping out towards the end of the year. Because people are gathering together for these celebrations, it also becomes a really popular time of year to get married. So sometime between Christmas and Twelfth Night. And here we see a print from the 19th century of Martha Dandridge Custis marrying George Washington, because they were married on Twelfth Night. Everyone's already there. All of the food is already made. Okay. So we're going back to another tavern scene where we can see that the windows are again decoratively stuck. Okay. And now we're going to roll into the 19th century. So sometimes people wonder, like, well, you're decorating the insides of the houses with these kinds of loose greenery. When do we get to the Christmas tree? I think most people know that it's a German tradition, but when does it come to the United States? When does it come to England? This is a print from the 19th century, and that's Queen Victoria and her husband, Prince Albert, and their children. Albert's German. And they had a Christmas tree in their home, and you can see it was illustrated. And so that became something that people in England began to do. The Christmas tree is introduced, and people probably out in the frontier or the German-speaking parts of Virginia, Pennsylvania, like those places that had that as part of their holiday traditions. You find them there, but they come to the culturally English or Anglican areas in the 19th century. And in Williamsburg, the very first Christmas tree arrives with Professor Charles Minnigerode, who was a professor at the College of William and Mary. And he brought this tradition with him when Nathaniel Beverly Tucker, who's a resident of Williamsburg, invited him to celebrate the holiday season at the St. George Tucker house. So he trimmed a tree with candles, very fancy paper decorations as a present for the Tuckers' children. Right? Probably not this big, probably not this fancy, but in the first quarter of the 19th century. Now, Colonial Williamsburg essentially founded as a restoration, not quite a museum yet, in 1929. By the mid-1930s, there are some buildings that have been restored or built and opened or reconstructed and opened to be visited by the public. And it's first decorated for Christmas in 1936, so only a few years after it had become a place where people could visit. And in 1936, the greenery was confined to a few plain wreaths that are on the outsides of buildings. A little bit of running cedar is hung about the governor's palace and the Raleigh Tavern, which was a reconstructed, both of those are reconstructed buildings. Mrs. Louise Fisher was placed in charge of flowers and Christmas decorations. She drove herself from Williamsburg up to the Library of Congress, where she turns up English and American pictorial examples of people decorating houses and taverns, particularly for Christmas. And we have seen some of them prior in the slideshow. She was also looking at other older sources. By 1939, she had started decorating with Della Robbia wreaths. Those had also become popular in America in the early 20th century, late 19th century. And her wreaths were beginning to attract this considerable comment as she's sort of at the beginning of the Williamsburg chrysalis look. Okay. Nobody really expected anyone to visit the newly restored Colonial Williamsburg during the holidays in 1934. But in addition to some of those decorations, those wreaths on the doors, they've also put colored lights on 10 different evergreen trees in the historic area, which is not obviously a colonial tradition. The foundation's president at the time, Kenneth Corley, wanted a much larger effort. So he directed the research department to find more authentic historical practices that could be revived. And you can think about why he would want them to do that. Like, what's the impetus to start making a thing, if you will, out of Christmas? And the answer is, of course, that he wants to encourage people to come to the historic area at the end of the year, as he wants to make Colonial Williamsburg a destination. And even at that time in the 1930s, Christmas was very much a holiday that was being celebrated, very secular. People were traveling and people were buying things. So it had already become kind of a consumer holiday, if you will, by the mid-1930s. So while these historians are looking for ways they're looking for what the authentic colonial experience would have been, they're kind of coming up empty because they're finding all of the things that we've just talked about. They're also finding that that period between Thanksgiving and Christmas itself, Advent, is not, this exciting party time, but rather this time of fasting and repentance that culminates in the Christmas dinner. So they are determined to be kind of more creative about it. The landscape architect at the time, Arthur Shercliffe, he's thinking about a practice his family had in Boston back in 1893, and he suggests placing a single lighted candle in the windows of the 4 buildings that at that time were open to the public. And so the candles were lit from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. And they had Louise Fisher decorate the shops and the windows of the palace and the Raleigh Tavern with greenery. So the lighting of the candles in the windows, which were actual candles, and then as soon as electric candles became available, became electric candles, because then you can have them on all night. And now I believe they're battery operated candles, which are even better, was adopted not because people in 18th century Virginia put candles in their windows during the holiday season, but because there was a reference when the Dunmores came to Virginia back, before Dunmore was persona non grata before the Revolution, that there was an illumination of the town in honor of Lady Dunmore's birthday. And so they have this historical reference to people putting candles in the windows in order to celebrate something and then blowing them out and putting them away. So Colonial Williamsburg is taking the decorations that were in the insides of the buildings, putting them on the outsides of the buildings. They're taking the concept of the candles or the illuminations for particular observances or celebrations, and they're grafting those onto the Christmas holiday. And then, with the candles being a little bit better than electrifying the trees. And then they also brought in fireworks because there were, again, fireworks at some of these celebrations, but they also kind of mimic the firing of the Christmas guns. So fireworks were popular. They're fired in honor of the monarch's birthday or great victory. And in 1957, as part of the celebration for the 350th anniversary of the founding of Jamestown, Colonial Williamsburg sets off fireworks on Market Square. And then they took that and they adapted those to be a Christmas celebration. So you can go to Williamsburg for grand illumination when the candles go on and the fireworks go off. This is a picture of the postcard of the governor's palace in Williamsburg. And you can look at I like to take a look at this particular postcard because in creating these Christmas looks, the earliest decorators were drawing from this kind of colonial style. And a way to think about this colonial style is the importance of symmetry. And this building really illustrates it well. So you look at the governor's palace, you've got a line right down the center of the building. You have the points coming up to the top, the door in the center, windows on either side, equal number of windows above that. It's opening into a very symmetrical garden because this is what's considered beautiful, organized, right? Very organized. And this symmetry of the plantings that are also kind of marching their way down to you. And that particular look is adopted into a style, Colonial Revival. Some of you probably live in neighborhoods that are filled with Colonial Revival houses, that brick facade, and this notion of balance. Okay, and you see it in a lot of different places. This is the Pitt House back in the mid-1990s. That's me. That's my roommate. We decorated our other roommate had to work that day, but we spent 2 weeks where it felt like forever putting together this particular set of wreaths to go on the door. And the concept that we were looking at was symmetry. And in fact, we were mimicking the way that a table would be set up in the 18th century. And I'll show you what that would have looked like. The wreath in the center has fruit on it, and there's some broken china that I haven't been able to find since then. And then there's the wreaths at the top left and the bottom right that have walnuts in them. And there's some apples in there, so a little bit of food, but that you have this balance around kind of the central element. Okay. And it's this custom of affixing fruits, vegetables, dried flowers and herbs and other plant life that becomes really very, very much colonial revival, right? And popular. Okay. So young back then. Okay. Okay. The first historic area residence doorway decoration contest takes place in 1937. So look at how quickly they are making the Christmas season into something that is for the public and a public celebration. The contest, the decorations were judged at that time on the types of materials, the creativity, the elements of design, originality, and also faithfulness to the spirit of 18th century decorative ideas, attention to detail, and then any written information provided by residents. The styles have changed significantly over time, and I'm going to show you, take you to Colonial Williamsburg's Facebook page in a couple of minutes and show you a little bit about how they have adapted themselves. But I picked out this assortment of wreaths from various time periods because you can see that these in particular, which are kind of old at this point, are really pretty good at adhering to some of the rules that I had to follow when I lived there, which was that you could only use materials that were available in the 18th century, that you really were supposed to be using, you had to use natural materials. So you could use things that were dried, you could use things that were fresh. What you could not use were like silk flowers. So this real emphasis. They also kind of didn't like you to use ribbon, even though ribbon was available in the 18th century, but you could use other things like the broken pottery. I knew people who had a friend who lived in a laundry building, and she decorated with soap balls in the wreath, which was nice because it kind of harkened back to the use of the building itself. In this one, you can see there's a wreath that has a cookie in the middle of it, and I had a neighbor who put gingerbread cookies on her wreaths and put them on, she had a fence, and she had roping, pine roping that went across it, and she put out the gingerbread cookie. They were the same gingerbread cookies. She used them year after year after year and just put them back in the freezer when she was done with them. This is a table arrangement from Hannah Glass's cookbook from the mid third quarter of the 18th century. And when you look at that table arrangement, she's telling you what is pleasing. So the first course for a winter meal you have, and then the second course, it's the table set in exactly the same way, where you have different types of food, but you have kind of complementary food at each end of the table, because you are not expecting, if you've got a lot of guests, that everybody is going to get a little of everything. Rather, they're going to get a little of something that's near them. So I keep going back to the 18th century, and for most of the 20th century, the design ideal is symmetry, right? Balance. Some of the materials that people were using, lots of different berries. In here, you can see there are some dried pods. There's a little bit of lemon. There's some fresh herbs that have been stuck into this wreath. Holly is incredibly popular and important because it's those traditional Christmas colors with the red berries and the green leaves. Pine cones, pomegranates. Actually, don't recommend pineapples because they tend to rot pretty quickly. These wreaths I've pulled out for you because they really show this kind of 20th century, late 20th century, early 21st century. Hard to think of ourselves as being in the early, mid, what, right now, 21st century, is this idea of symmetry, but for, you know, either with even numbered that are marching all the way around, or an odd number where you have something that's anchoring it. So if you look at this wreath here on the left of your screen, I think, you see apples that are surrounded by clamshells. So they're kind of creating a flower. And then the wreath itself is a pine wreath that has different berries stuck into it. So you're getting some different colors and textures. Then the one next to it has, again, if you look at those elements, so it's almost like you're creating like this element and then repeating it around the wreath. So the oranges, the little white flowers, and then the pine cones. Then you can see the same thing on the last one with the apples and the cotton pods. The cotton pods that have had the cotton pulled out are the kind of brown ones, and then the cotton pods that have the cotton in them. So here, I'll show you what a cotton pod looks like in a little bit. All right. So, wishing you joy, peace, and prosperity for you and your family. But now I want to show you some of the techniques in making the wreaths. But before I do that, are there any questions, Robert or Patricia, that you want to feed to me? Too many dark hours in the solstice. Yes, many dark hours in the solstice.
Yeah, I think I was referring to the revelries.
Yes. Yeah.
So Liz, some people might have heard of Colonial Williamsburg, but don't know where it's at. Where is Colonial Williamsburg?
It is, it's in Virginia, and it is south and east of Washington, D.C. Used to be, when I first moved away up here to Northern Virginia, it was about a 2.5 hour drive. Now it's closer to a 3 and something hour drive because the traffic on 95 is so untenable. And we blame Fredericksburg. But
Yeah, in Virginia, it's South Richmond.
yeah,
And I would imagine
south.
that would be a really fascinating place to work at and a
It
fun
was
at.
it was interesting, right? Particularly when you live there. So like anyone who's ever lived at work, right? You get to know people really, really well, and you have absolutely no privacy.
Yeah, so if anyone listening has never been to Colonial Williamsburg,
Mhm.
that has to be on like the top 10 list of historical places in America that you should go visit.
Yeah,
It's just really incredible.
it is, and you have to give yourself, I think, a lot of time, because it's not just Williamsburg, right? Williamsburg was preserved because it was the capital of Virginia during the Revolutionary War. Um, at, Before the Revolutionary War ended, Thomas Jefferson decided to move the capital of Virginia from Williamsburg to Richmond. So he went further to the west. So you think about, like, settlement has already moved further to the west, so it makes sense. Although he never liked Williamsburg, and he liked the idea of being able to found, because to design, because he's an architect, right? These new government buildings, and impose under his vision of what government should be and should look like. So once the capital moves to Richmond, Williamsburg remains the city, but there's really not a whole lot there except for the college, and it doesn't change a whole lot. It changed. There's a lot of There's a lot of existing buildings. From that were still existing in the early 20th century, and that's one of the reasons that there was this push to restore it. But when you do go, you can also go to Yorktown, and you can go to Jamestown,
The
and
historic triangle.
the historic triangle. And if you are going to be doing any traveling, 2025 and 2026 would be a terrific time to do it, because it is the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence.
Ah,
There's going to be a lot of stuff.
okay. Well, that's cool.
We do have a question. The significance of fruit in the design, is there any significance beyond color?
Color is, it's color, but it's also it's an easy thing to use. Right?
Yeah, and I'm also thinking that fruits would have seeds inside, so that's part of that whole celebration of the coming of the new life.
Yes.
Yeah, pine cones would be the same thing because that's the seed pod, right? Yeah.
Yes, I think that's a great way of thinking about it, is because it is associated with agriculture and planting, and like you said, the colorfulness of it.
Yeah, which would be associated with light, right? Because without light, there's no color. So yeah. Yeah, I have a feeling that sometimes people, because you hear a lot of people who disparage the idea, well, those are really pagan customs, but that's the significance in Christendom. I think it's considered the coming of the light, right? So yes, the return. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's not completely unrelated, and there were reasons why it was done that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's all these nice strands that you can start to pull together.
Yes.
And when you have to make these things, and they can get you can put a lot of money into them too.
Oh yeah.
You can get people to make them for you, or you can make them yourself. That when you have to really think about how you're going to make your wreaths sustainable. Now, when I lived in the historic area, we had to have our decorations up by, I think it was the first weekend in December. So like this would be the weekend that you'd have to be fully decorated. That's now changed, right? They now have to have them up around Thanksgiving, because that's kind of the kickoff, right, to the Christmas season. So that makes it a lot longer. So you're adding at least a week, maybe a little bit more than a week, to to that period of time you have to be decorated, and your decorations have to look the same during the whole time. The problem with using fresh materials is that they start to not look so great after a couple of weeks. So we had to completely remake and change out our once during the holiday season. Now I'm pretty sure that people have to do it twice.
So you're not allowed to shellac them or anything? You know, is there ways of preserving some of that fruit? No?
No. And that's, we just, the second year I lived there, we went really big on holly, and we made this massive, massive, massive holly wreath for the front door, and it looked really beautiful. Had to change out the whole thing one time. So we had to acquire the holly. So we did that by dark of night with our shears and going around and illicitly trimming the holly.
I'm thinking taking out a second mortgage. Yeah,
I mean, like a stealth wreath refresh.
Yes, we went around and we stole holly from the, it's been a long time. I think the statute of limitations has run out. So we went around and we clandestinely clipped holly, because, you know, we were I lived with, in a group house with people in our 20s. And we thought it would be super cool to do the holly sprigs in the windows. And because we had better constructed windows, we couldn't really stick them in between the panes and the sills. So we tried a whole bunch of things. We tried hot glue, putting them in, and what happened was the hot glue eventually dried out. So the holly dried out and fell off. We tried tying a string around it and, you know, trying to hang it that way, and that didn't work either. And we were continually getting in trouble because people really liked the holly. The people who were in charge of the historic area, they liked the holly in the windows, but we could not maintain it like so it looked consistent every single day. So we're like, never again, right?
Oh.
And one of the reasons you see a lot of dried materials is because you don't have to change them quite as often.
Yeah,
And
I was
animals
sick of
don't-
mortgage when you were showing some of those photos, and I was thinking that, yeah, it could be a very expensive proposition.
Yep.
Yeah, and you go to Williamsburg area. There's all these cool restaurants and these quaint little stores. You can buy stuff for your home, and if you're not into history, there's a lot of golfing. I don't know, it's just a fascinating place to visit.
Are you saying golf has no history, Robert?
Well, I'm not really into golf, but there is a lot of golf because it's kind of turning into like a big retirement area.
Oh, huge, yes.
And yeah, a lot of restaurants.
A lot of restaurants. There's outdoor things. There's outdoor things too. Like you can go canoeing and hiking, and there's all kinds. And then you can go to Norfolk too.
Oh yeah, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and there's is it pronounced Wyeths or Wyeths? Withs, yeah. Is that? Oh my God, they have like the most amazing caramel apples I've ever had. The caramel is like twice as thick as it is on a regular apple. The apples are always so fresh. I used to pass through there, and I would like go out of my way just to stop it there and get one of these caramel apples. They were so good.
Well,
I should see if they can mail them to me.
It's still there. They are still there, so no need to be concerned. They're still there.
Is that a thing now?
Captain George's. Oh, go ahead, Patty.
Oh no, historic destinations, because here in Portsmouth, we've just celebrated our 400th anniversary this year, but we have now surpassed half again as many restaurant seats as there is total population.
Oh, yeah.
So it's definitely a foodie destination as well as the historic thing. I wonder if that's associated other places in the country besides Williamsburg and Portsmouth.
Well, there's Captain George's Seafood Buffet. Quality place. Liz, I don't know if you ever made it to that one, but that was a good one.
I lived in an apartment building behind Captain George's Seafood, and
oh gosh,
really blocked because of buses that were dropping off for the buffet. I was down for a conference at the College of William and Mary in October. I can test that there are still a lot of great restaurants.
Okay, very good. All right.
And of course the cheese shop, right?
All right, so not just history stuff.
Not just history stuff. Right. Let's go back to history. I made some wreaths for you so you can all get a sense of how to do them. And I did them today. Remember how I said that I really liked the holly? This is my holly wreath. Right? Nice. Right. And I want to show you how I did it. So this is something that like you all could do if you really wanted to. Right? Is I happen to have a holly tree in my yard, so I don't have to do any illicit cutting anymore. Although we did have to get the long one, so you can cut far up at the top. So we cut some sprigs of holly, right? And then I fasten them into little bundles. And I use twist ties to do that. They're not actually the twist ties, they're like the gardening ties that you can get a lot of different places. So I make lots of little bundles, right? And then these get fixed around a form. So here's the front, right, of the wreath. And there's the back. So it's a styrofoam wreath form. And then I fix the bundle with a pin. This might be hard to see. But I have a whole bunch of greening pins that I got from the specialty store, the nursery. And then you just stick your bundle right into the form, and work your way around like that. You have a really pretty wreath. I'm going to make 2 of these, put them on the front of my house with the illicit ribbon, but since I don't live in the historic area, I can use whatever I want to hang it, and then create some balance and symmetry in the front of my house because I've got 3 windows, so I'll put holly on either side. Then if I wanted to zhuzh up a little bit, maybe something with a little, I could put something else in there with a little bit more color. If I wanted the holly that came with, that had berries in it, I would have to go over to the school across the street and illicitly steal their holly because they have the holly with berries and I don't.
Holly is male and female, right?
Yes.
So only the female ones would have berries. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have that. The wreath that's going to go in the middle is this one here that I made today. I'm going to put this down. I'm going to move the camera so that I think you all can see it a little bit better. How weird is that going to be with the moving camera? But I think you can see it better this way. This is made with, and I made this wreath today on a wreath form by making little bundles of the pine that I got from the Christmas tree lot when I got my Christmas tree, because they had a whole, now you know what that big pile is. These with the blueberries are the cedar that is at the front of my yard. And I like the color of it. I have some clam shells that I got from a trip to, where did I get those? I think I got those on the Outer Banks. These over here are pearl onions. So you wire those together. These are wood curls. So if you know someone who does woodwork, you can make little wood curls, or you can do what I did, which is you buy them at the Dollar Tree. And then some little shapes, some cutouts. So again, I don't live in a historic area, so I can do whatever I want. But interestingly, all of these materials were available in Virginia in the 18th century. The wood shapes, the curls, the onions, the cedar, the pine, the clam shells, but probably not the pony beads that are in the middle of the little wood curl, because otherwise the wire will fall out. And put this back up here. Hello. So So because I'm very 20th century in my approach to wreath making, I made mine symmetrical. Right? So I have 6 wood curls, and then they're alternating with the white elements of the onions. And I like the shells because there's a little bit of blue in the shells, a little bit of blue and white. So I think that's picking up the color here of these berries. And I like that the texture and the greens are slightly different. If I wanted to take it a little bit further, I might have gone out and gotten some of my rosemary and put rosemary in those bundles too. So you get just, again, a slightly different shade of green. But I didn't do that because I've used a lot of rosemary this year and I didn't want to stress the bush any more than I already have. And this, I think, will last pretty well through the end of the season, because while the greens are going to get dried out, the other pieces of it are not going to get as badly dried out. And I don't think that the squirrels are going to be leaping onto the front of my house to feast on the pearl onions. Although if they do, the cat will get pretty excited.
Yeah, that can be a problem, I think, with all those natural materials, couldn't it? I never thought of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I don't use apples. Right. You can use, I did start today to work on a little decoratively stuck fellow clementine, because I have small wreath forms, so I started to stick the clementine with cloves. And that's something that's popular in the 18th century, is taking an orange and to make a pomander ball and stick the whole thing with cloves, because it smells nice. And then as it dries, it will, because if it's stuck all over, it will dry actually in a nice, not moldy kind of a way. And then you have that nice smell throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, I made quite a few of those in my lifetime.
Yeah.
So that's a smell great. The combination of the orange or citrus and cloves smells great.
Yep. All right. The last thing I wanted to show you all, because I had someone ask me last week about how traditions have changed. And maybe not so much traditions, but in the way that people are decorating now that we're in the 20th century, 21st century. And so I went to Colonial Williamsburg, the Rockefeller Library's Facebook page. Yes. Love, by the way, if you're someone who likes history information coming as a drip on Facebook, love the Rockefeller Library page, because they have a lot of information about the history of Colonial Williamsburg. And they have these really lengthy posts. They're like, like a 3-minute read, right? And they always have lots of pictures and documents. And they posted some pictures of the some wreaths in the historic area this year. And this one, that was kind of fun. This is a little wooden model of the fire engine. It's not a train, even though it looks like a train, it's the fire engine. So there's like little handles on the side, and so they fill it with water, and then move the handles up and down, kind of like a hand car on a train, and then the water would shoot out this tank on the top. And up here you can see they've used the plant to create the water shooting out of the fire engine up here, and this is a piece of roofing tile. And here is some material that I think is made to look like, it's supposed to look like smoke. So this is cute because it's telling a story. And it is all natural materials, and they probably won't have to change it. Right?
That is creative.
Yeah. Let's see if I can get to, doesn't want to let me go to the next one for some reason. Okay. Let's try and get to the next one this way. Very slow connection tonight. I'm going to share this one and then one more. Okay. Can you see it? This is the front door of a house, and this is also telling a story. This is a doll. Those are cowrie beads. The doll is carrying a little other tiny doll on her back and a bundle of clothes, and it's underneath a lottery banner. So the story that's being told here is of a woman who is emancipating herself. And she is running away from enslavement, carrying her belongings and her baby. And I believe that the lottery is up here because it would be referring, because a lottery was oftentimes held when an estate was being liquidated. So people would buy opportunities to win, kind of like a raffle, if you will. So the 18th century lottery is what we would consider today to be a raffle, an opportunity, buy tickets to have the opportunity to buy things out of someone's estate. So the story that's being told here is a woman who is running away because the household in which she lived is being dissolved, and it is exactly the time when families would be separated. That is a very 20th century approach, 21st century approach to decorating
and poignant
storytelling. I think that's kind of neat. Yeah.
Poignant. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, see if I can get to the one more. Oh, sorry, I have a really slow connection tonight, so I'm just going to let it go with that. Okay. So just to summarize, what I find kind of neat about the way people are decorating now is that very much reflecting the time periods in which they live, the interests that they have, and that the way we think of the past has really evolved quite a bit too, or the way we interpret the past has evolved a lot. So way back in 1936 or 37, I should say, when we start to see that first decorating contest, the idea is that they're trying to recreate something that would have felt very familiar to people of the past, even though they wouldn't have, right? As a way of bringing people into that story. And the story they were telling in 1836 was very much about, that the revolutionary people, the leaders, kind of a very narrow definition of what the past was, almost like a political military perspective and a decorative arts perspective. Today in the 21st century, we have a lot more expansive view about history and the people who are making history and all of these different ways of thinking about it and examining about it, and just a really larger kind of set of stories that we're drawing from. And you can see that very much reflected in the way that people are celebrating, thinking about the holiday season. So.
Yeah. I'm a New England native, and just what you were talking about right now, we eventually got to a point where we weren't so anti-Christmas. And one of the traditional decorations in New England has always been popcorn and cranberries strung on thread or string.
Yeah.
Popcorn would be the seed and the bloom, right? And the cranberries, of course, are a native product. So,
Yes. So you're very much adapting what's around you, right? Celebrating the materials that you have. All right. Do you all have any other questions or thoughts?
I don't see any new questions in the Q&A, but sometimes people respond to the queue. Deb is saying, if you do get tickets to Colonial Williamsburg, be sure to visit the Charlton Coffee House. Great program ending with an American Heritage hot chocolate sample. Quite different and delicious.
Yes. It's one of the more recently reconstructed buildings. One of my colleagues was in charge of the early programming there, and I got to go all the behind the scenes, all the way down to the basement where they have the modern kitchen where they make the hot chocolate and send it up via dumbwaiter. So very cool building.
Let's see, Elizabeth, how did you attach the shells to your wreath? That's from Amanda.
Oh, okay. Well, I had to drill a hole in the shells. So you need a drill bit that is pretty hardy, the kind that you can cut ceramics with. And then I wired the shell. So put in the wire, it kind of created like a little knot at the top, trying to be as unobtrusive as possible. And then when you pull it through, I just have to twist it to the back of the form. So see how this is, can you tell it's a metal circle? And so everything is just tied, all the wire is tied to the back of the form.
I lost my interest in decorating with shells as soon as you said drill.
That's why I use the same ones every year. Like anything I've ever drilled, I save.
Yeah, I'm not power tool handy. Let's see. Oh, Amanda is thanking you. Okay. And hold on, let me find it again. Oh, and Mary is saying how pretty your decorations are, and every year this presentation just gets better and better. So
that's so nice.
There's a lot of detail so you do a good job varying it from one year to the next. And let's see, Natalie is interested in knowing more about Jamestown and Colonial Williamsburg. And let's see.
The program on each of those places, they're so fascinating.
Did you say you are going to do a program, or you could do a program on either one of those?
Oh yeah, you could do one on it. Unfortunately, I'm a little pressed for time these days, but maybe someday.
Okay.
I have one on
We'll plan a field trip there. We'll plan a field trip there.
You should.
Liz, while we have kids, you want to tell people about the Army Museum?
Oh, okay. So my day job is the Army Museum, the National Museum of the United States Army. It opened in 2021. So we've just passed our 2-year anniversary, and I highly recommend not ever trying to open a large museum in the middle of a global pandemic. Do that if you can avoid it, and hopefully it will never happen again. But we are the National Museum. Some of you may live near some of the Army Museum Enterprise museums on bases. So I think that's the foundation.
Oh, yeah. Wrong website. Sorry.
Yeah, armyhistory.org. That's the foundation. So we are, that one.
All right, we'll try this
that's
one.
The building, it is designed to very deliberately to reflect all these different meanings. So if it kind of looks a little bit like a bunker. Up there on the top, you can see the Medal of Honor garden, which is a really lovely outdoor contemplative space with a granite wall in which the names of the people who have been awarded the Medal of Honor are engraved on the wall. When you walk in the front door, you kind of follow the soldiers' pylon stories, kind of marching into formation. There are different galleries for different eras of Army history for each different war. We have temporary exhibits, including the one on Army dogs that will be up through, I think, through the end of this month. We're free to visit. You do need a ticket, but you can also just get one at the door when you walk in. Probably budget about 2 hours of your time, maybe a little bit longer. There's a cafe and a gift shop. And then you can see here that we have a pretty robust offering of different programs. Quite a lot of these programs, all of the virtual ones, get cross-posted to the Washington, D.C. History and Culture Meetup. And I always put the Zoom link into the meetup, so you don't actually need to go reserve a ticket. Just go to that Zoom link.
And
usually
then
takes June. Mm-hmm.
Here's what you were talking about earlier: public programs, history hikes.
Yes, there's our history hike. That one I'm not posting to Meetup because it will fill with people who come through the museum. But since you're all on Meetup and you can see it, this is one. Go to the museum's website and reserve your free ticket.
And how about this symposiums?
There is a symposium on D-Day because it's the 80th anniversary of D-Day. This is all day long on the 5th. And it coincides with the opening of a temporary exhibit called the D-Day Experience. This is going to be kind of interesting because you come in and you get an iPad and you use the iPad to interact with story pylons in this space.
All
And so
right.
if you come to our free symposium, you get a sneak peek at the D-Day experience.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Oops.
Yeah. So do come visit, come to our programs.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz.
Yes.
Patty, any other comments or questions from anybody or yourself?
Let's see. I'm not seeing any new ones added. People seem generally appreciative and seem to agree that each year this presentation they learn more, and you do an amazing job broadening it. It's not old. It just, you add more to it each year. So it's really, really very much appreciated.
Oh,
Vinny is just noting too that he loves learning how the various cultures impact the wreath making too.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Liz. Bravo. Greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. It's been lovely to hear you again.
Well, thank you. Yes, it really is very interesting, and I love all the different ways of getting insight into history, but it's not just history; it's the culture and the communal event, and just to think of how Williamsburg, in its purpose, brings that community into it. I imagine there's a few under the breath less appreciative words that might be thrown out there in the ether as people are trying to maintain this or actually get it together. But yeah, it just is, there's just so many different thoughts that come in as you try to, you stretch your concept of what this means. Most of us are imbued with certain things as we're younger, and then it evolves as you get older, but you don't necessarily automatically bring in or assume the various differences across different parts of the country and other cultures adding in to what we experience.
Yeah.
So you do a good job with that.
Well, thank you.
Very welcome.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This will, we stop the recording.